The American transportation system faces significant challenges that affect millions of citizens' daily lives and the country's economic and environmental health. From its origins as a car-centric network to its current state of underfunded and aging infrastructure, U.S. transportation has a unique set of obstacles that have hindered its development relative to other developed nations. By examining the historical, political, economic, and cultural factors that shape transportation in the United States, we can better understand why the system struggles and what might be done to improve it. Historical roots of car-centric infrastructure. One of the most defining characteristics of the American transportation system is its heavy reliance on cars. Since the mid-20th century, the U.S. has invested primarily in highway development and suburban expansion, influenced by policies like the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which created the interstate highway system. This infrastructure facilitated widespread car ownership and encouraged a sprawling suburban layout that persists today. With the ability to travel long distances in relatively short times, American cities and towns spread further apart, making it more difficult for public transit systems to provide efficient service over larger distances. This car-centric approach contrasts sharply with many European and Asian countries, where high population densities and concentrated urban centres support more compact, efficient transit networks. While cars provide flexibility and freedom, a transportation system dominated by highways and private vehicles poses several problems. First, it leads to greater environmental impacts, as cars contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. Second, car dependency increases traffic congestion, road maintenance costs, and accident rates. By favouring car infrastructure, the US has limited the potential for diverse transportation options, leaving many Americans with few choices beyond driving. Underinvestment in public transit and the consequences of aging infrastructure. A major challenge facing US transportation today is the chronic underinvestment in public transit systems. In recent decades, federal and state funds have been insufficient to meet the growing demand for public transportation in urban areas. Compared to other developed nations, the US spends far less on maintaining and expanding public transit. This funding shortfall has led to fragmented and underdeveloped public transit systems in many cities, resulting in limited service, unreliable schedules, and inadequate coverage. Many transit systems do not extend far beyond city centres, leaving suburban and rural communities with few public transit options. The American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, regularly assesses the state of US infrastructure, and transportation infrastructure often receives poor ratings. The ASCE's 2021 Infrastructure Report Card gave US transit a D grade, indicating severe deficiencies in funding and maintenance. Aging infrastructure exacerbates these problems. Much of the country's transit systems, bridges and roads were built decades ago, and without consistent investment in maintenance, they have deteriorated significantly. Repair costs rise as infrastructure ages, and the longer maintenance is deferred, the more costly and disruptive the repairs become. This aging infrastructure also affects public safety. Failing bridges, deteriorating roads, and outdated transit vehicles increase the likelihood of accidents, causing both economic and human costs. In many cases, limited funding forces transit agencies to make difficult choices between expanding service and maintaining existing infrastructure, leading to a cycle of poor service that discourages public transit use and further reduces funding. Political and cultural factors limiting progress. Transportation policy in the US is influenced by a complex web of federal, state, and local regulations. Unlike in many European and Asian nations, where central governments oversee and fund national transportation initiatives, US transportation policy often reflects the priorities of individual states or municipalities. Federal funding is available, but it is subject to political cycles and priorities that may not align with the areas most in need of development. Political division between rural and urban interests further complicates funding decisions, as lawmakers must often balance the needs of urban public transit with those of rural road networks. At the local level, the cultural attachment to car ownership in the US influences transportation policy and public funding allocations. The car has long symbolized freedom and independence in American culture, which has discouraged efforts to build robust public transit systems. Suburban communities, which were designed around car use, tend to resist transit expansion, fearing it could disrupt their car-dependent lifestyle. This cultural resistance to public transit investment creates a cycle where car ownership remains the most practical option, even as it contributes to congestion, pollution, and urban sprawl. Additionally, federal regulations and a patchwork of permitting processes make infrastructure projects time-consuming and costly. In some cases, projects face delays due to lengthy environmental impact assessments, land acquisition issues, and conflicting interests among local stakeholders. These bureaucratic hurdles increase the costs of construction, leading to delays and forcing cities to prioritize smaller projects over comprehensive transit solutions. High costs of infrastructure projects and the need for sustainable solutions. One of the primary reasons for the lack of large-scale transit projects in the US is the high cost associated with building and maintaining transportation infrastructure. Construction costs in the US are significantly higher than in many other countries, driven by factors like high labor costs, stringent regulations, and sometimes inefficient project management. For example, building 1 mile of subway in the US can cost several times more than in Europe or Asia. These high costs limit the ability of cities to expand transit networks and improve service quality. Moreover, the reliance on short-term funding cycles creates challenges for planning and sustaining large projects. Infrastructure projects often require long-term investments, but US funding structures are typically tied to election cycles and subject to political influence. When government priorities shift, funding for transportation projects can be reduced or diverted, which disrupts progress. This funding volatility makes it difficult to complete comprehensive transit networks, as agencies cannot plan projects with consistent funding streams. Adding to the challenge, the US transportation system is predominantly focused on fossil fuels. Car dependency means that Americans use large amounts of gasoline, contributing to carbon emissions and environmental degradation. Moving toward more sustainable solutions, such as electric buses, light rail, and high-speed trains, would require an overhaul of the existing infrastructure. While some cities have started adopting electric buses and bike-sharing programs, these initiatives remain limited in scope compared to more integrated solutions in places like the Netherlands and Germany, where governments have invested heavily in sustainable transportation options. Learning from global models. What the US could learn. Countries with robust and efficient transportation systems offer valuable insights for the US. Japan, Germany, and the Netherlands have invested extensively in public transportation, prioritizing high-speed rail, extensive metro systems, and integrated urban planning. For example, Japan's Shinkansen high-speed rail network connects cities across the country quickly and efficiently, reducing the need for air travel on shorter domestic routes. In contrast, the US has limited high-speed rail options, with Amtrak being the primary long-distance train provider, but lacking the infrastructure for high-speed connections outside of the Northeast Corridor. In Scandinavian countries, transportation policies emphasize integration between different modes of transit, with easy connections between trains, buses, trams, and cycling infrastructure. Copenhagen and Amsterdam, for instance, have bike-friendly layouts and efficient public transit systems that reduce car dependency and create healthier, more environmentally friendly urban spaces. For the US to develop a comparable system, substantial investments in multimodal transit options would be required, along with cultural shifts to encourage alternatives to driving. Furthermore, public transit in countries like Germany and Sweden is heavily subsidized by the government, making it affordable and accessible for citizens. These subsidies are supported by progressive taxes and revenue from other sectors, which allows for continuous maintenance and expansion of transit systems. This stands in contrast to US transit funding, which often relies on fare revenue and unstable federal funding, leading to inconsistent service and limited accessibility for low-income residents. Addressing the challenges of American transportation. The challenges facing America's transportation system are rooted in a combination of historical decisions, political fragmentation, cultural factors, and financial constraints. Car dependency, insufficient investment in public transit, aging infrastructure, and high project costs have all contributed to a system that struggles to meet the needs of the modern American population. To address these issues, The US could benefit from looking at international models that prioritize public transit, sustainable infrastructure, and integrated urban planning. Expanding public transportation options, updating aging infrastructure, and embracing sustainable practices could improve the transportation system, reducing congestion and environmental impacts while enhancing accessibility. Overcoming these obstacles will require not only increased funding, but also shifts in policy and public attitudes. By learning from global transportation systems, the US can create a more efficient, inclusive, and sustainable network that supports economic growth and improves the quality of life for all Americans.